I thought nothing could be more humiliating than being banished to the kids' table at my father's most important dinner, until their guest of honor walked in and saw me there. That's when their perfect family illusion began to crumble. The phone call came on a Tuesday, and like most calls from my mother, it started with a voice so saccharine it could give you a cavity. "Alex, honey, I have the most wonderful news." I braced myself, gripping the phone a little tighter. My mother's wonderful news usually translated to some new, elaborate way for me to feel like the family's resident disappointment. I was a freelance graphic designer. In a family of surgeons and corporate lawyers, I might as well have been a professional thumb twiddler. To them, my life was a quirky, artsy hobby, not a career. "Dad got the partnership," she announced, the glee in her voice practically vibrating through the phone. "We're celebrating. Saturday night, 8 o'clock, at Le Ciel, and you absolutely must be there." Le Ciel, of course. The kind of restaurant where the water glasses cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and the waiters look at you with disdain if your shoes aren't made from the hide of an endangered species. It was my family's natural habitat, a knot formed in my stomach. These events were always the same, a stage for my parents to show off their prized son, my older brother Mark, his equally perfect wife Jessica, and by extension, their own success. I was the set dressing they couldn't quite figure out how to hide. "Wow, Mom, that's great for Dad. Really," I said, trying to inject some genuine enthusiasm into my voice. "But Saturday is a bit short notice. I have a big project deadline." "Nonsense," she cut me off, the sweetness in her voice thinning to a sharp edge. "This is for your father. It's important for the whole family to be there to show a united front. Mark and Jessica are flying in from Boston. You live 20 minutes away, Alex. Don't be difficult." The unspoken threat hung in the air. "Don't embarrass us. Don't make a scene." I knew it was a losing battle. If I didn't go, it would become a family-wide scandal. I would be ungrateful, selfish, and unsupportive. If I went, I'd spend 3 hours feeling like a bug under a microscope. It was a choice between two different kinds of misery. "Okay, Mom," I sighed, defeated. "I'll be there." The honey immediately flooded back into her voice. "Wonderful. Oh, and Alex, please try to look presentable." Click. The line went dead. For the next 4 days, I wrestled with a familiar churning anxiety. I sifted through my closet, trying to find an outfit that screamed, "I am a successful adult and not a child playing dress-up in my parents' world." I settled on a simple, elegant black dress and heels I probably couldn't afford. I did my hair. I put on makeup. I practiced my "I'm so happy to be here" smile in the mirror until my face ached. I was arming myself for battle, hoping that maybe, just this once, I could blend in. Maybe this time, they'd see me as an equal, a 26-year-old woman with her own life and career, not just the weird, artistic daughter who didn't go to medical school. That little flicker of hope was a dangerous thing, but it was all I had. When I walked into Le Ciel, the sheer opulence of the place hit me like a physical blow. Towering ceilings, a chandelier that looked like a frozen firework, and the hushed, reverent murmur of people who never had to look at a price tag. I spotted my family immediately, holding court near the bar. My father, beaming, looking every bit the high-powered partner. My mother, draped in jewels, her smile as sharp and brilliant as the diamonds on her wrist. And there they were, the golden couple, Mark and Jessica. He in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, and she, effortlessly chic and radiating a calm, confident superiority. My mother saw me first. Her eyes did a quick, critical scan from my shoes to my hair, and a flicker of something, maybe approval, maybe just relief that I wasn't wearing ripped jeans, crossed her face. "Alex, you made it," she said, her voice a little too loud, drawing the attention of the others. My dad gave me a brief, awkward hug. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, kiddo," looking sharp. Kiddo. I was 2 years younger than him. Jessica offered me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The initial greetings were over in 30 seconds, and then the conversation seamlessly flowed back to Mark's latest surgical triumph and Jessica's charity gala. I stood there, holding a glass of sparkling water, feeling like a ghost at the feast. After a few excruciating minutes of smiling and nodding, the maitre d' approached. "Your table is ready, Mr. Henderson." He was a tall, severe-looking man who looked like he was born in a tuxedo. He began to lead us through the maze of pristine white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. My mother walked beside him. My father and the golden couple followed, and I brought up the rear. We were heading towards a large circular table in a prime spot overlooking the city skyline. It was beautiful. For a fleeting moment, I let that dangerous hope flicker again. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. We were almost there when my mother stopped. She turned to me and placed a cool, perfectly manicured hand on my arm, halting my progress. The rest of the family continued to the main table without a backward glance. "Not that way, dear," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She gestured with her head towards a dark corner of the restaurant, near the swinging doors to the kitchen, and next to a large potted fern that had clearly seen better days. I followed her gaze and my blood ran cold. Tucked away in the shadows was another, much smaller table. It was set with cheaper-looking cutlery, brightly colored paper napkins, and what looked like a jug of juice instead of wine glasses. Seated around it were my two younger cousins, 10-year-old Chloe and 12-year-old Sam, already engrossed in games on their iPads, and their sullen teenage brother Leo, who was furiously texting under the table. It was, without a doubt, a kid's table. I turned back to my mother, a disbelieving laugh bubbling in my throat. "Very funny, Mom. What's this?" Her smile was tight, unwavering, and utterly devoid of humor. "Alex," she said, her voice calm and firm, as if explaining something very simple to a very stupid child. "We need the main table for the adults. Your father has business associates joining us. This is a very important night for his image." She patted my arm, her touch feeling more like a push. "You'll be so much more comfortable over there. Go on now." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the words. It felt like a prank, a spectacularly cruel joke, and I was waiting for the punchline. But her face was a mask of serene, unyielding seriousness. "The kids' table," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Mom, I'm 26 years old. I'm not sitting with the children." My voice was quiet, but it was shaking with a fury that was starting to boil up from the pit of my stomach. "This is Dad's night," she countered, her voice dropping even lower, her grip on my arm tightening like a vice. "His new partners, Mr. and Mrs. Davies, are very important, very conservative people. We need to present a certain image, a successful, cohesive family." She glanced over at the main table where my father was already holding court, completely oblivious, or more likely, willfully ignorant, of the drama unfolding behind him. "Your freelance work is lovely, dear, but it's not the kind of thing the Davieses would understand. It's better this way. Less complicated. Less complicated." My entire existence, my career, my life, all boiled down to an inconvenience that needed to be managed, hidden away in a corner so it wouldn't tarnish their perfect picture. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck and spread across my face. I looked past her, my eyes pleading with my father. He caught my gaze for a split second, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, before he quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by the wine list. A knife twisted in my gut. He wouldn't help me. Then I looked to Mark, my big brother, the golden child. He saw the whole exchange. He saw my face, my mother's rigid posture. He just gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head and a tired look that clearly said, "Alex, for God's sake, just do it. Don't ruin this." The betrayal from both of them was more painful than my mother's casual cruelty. I was completely and utterly alone. The maître d' was hovering nearby, his face a perfect blank slate, but I could feel his judgment, his pity. I could feel the eyes of other diners turning towards us, sensing the friction. My mother's smile was starting to look more like a snarl. "Don't make a scene, Alexandra," she hissed, her fingernails digging into my arm. A scene. That was their greatest fear, not my feelings, not the disrespect, but the public embarrassment of a daughter who wouldn't quietly accept her place. I had two choices. I could scream, I could yell, flip the table, tell her exactly what I thought of her, and her pathetic obsession with appearances, and in doing so, I would prove her right. I'd be the hysterical, difficult, ungrateful child she always painted me as. Or I could take the humiliation, swallow it down like poison, and sit at that god-forsaken table. For a moment, I honestly didn't know which one I would do. Then a cold, hard clarity washed over me. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a public meltdown. I would play her game, for now. I pulled my arm from her grasp, my movements stiff and deliberate. "Fine," I said, the word coming out flat and dead. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at any of them. I turned and began the longest walk of my life. It was only about 20 feet, but it felt like miles. Each step was a fresh wave of shame. I could feel the sympathetic stares, the curious whispers. I was a 26-year-old woman in a black cocktail dress, being sent to the corner like a naughty toddler. I reached the small, wobbly table. The air here smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt butter from the nearby kitchen doors. Chloe and Sam didn't even look up from their iPads. Leo, the teenager, glanced up from his phone, a look of genuine pity on his face. "That's rough," he muttered before turning back to his screen. I sank into a chair that was slightly sticky, my expensive dress feeling absurdly out of place. From my shadowy corner I had a perfect, horrible view of the main table. The show. My mother was laughing at something my father said, patting his hand. Mark and Jessica were a portrait of sophisticated grace. They had already forgotten I existed. I was a problem that had been solved, an unsightly piece of furniture that had been moved out of sight. The waiter came to their table, pouring a deep red wine into large, sparkling glasses. A different waiter, a younger kid who looked like he was on his first shift, came to my table and wordlessly plonked down a jug of orange juice and a basket of dry bread rolls. I just stared at it, the lump in my throat so big I couldn't have swallowed if I'd wanted to. I watched them toast. They raised their glasses to my father, to the partnership, to their perfect, successful family. A family I was apparently no longer a part of. About 15 minutes later, the guests of honor arrived. Mr. and Mrs. Davies were an impeccably dressed couple in their late 50s. My father jumped to his feet, his smile wide and eager. He shook Mr. Davies' hand vigorously, while my mother air-kissed his wife. Introductions were made. I watched them all shake hands with Mark, the brilliant surgeon, and Jessica, the beautiful philanthropist. My father was puffing his chest out, practically glowing with pride as he presented his flawless son and daughter-in-law. This was it. This was the image. The reason I was sitting in Siberia nursing a glass of tap water. Mr. Davies was a titan in the world of corporate finance, a name I'd heard my father mention with reverence for years. But it was his wife my eyes were fixed on. She had an air of quiet authority, her tailored suits speaking of a different kind of power. There was something familiar about her, though I couldn't place it. As my father gestured expansively around the restaurant, Mrs. Davies's gaze swept the room. Her eyes passed over the other tables, the waiters, the decor, and then they landed on the dark corner. They landed on me. Her polite social smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes widened, and a flicker of unmistakable recognition crossed her face. She looked from me to my father, and then back to me again, a deep frown creasing her brow. She took a step away from my father and said something to him, her voice too low for me to hear, while pointing directly at me. My father's jovial expression froze. He followed her pointed finger, and his eyes landed on me, sitting in my corner of shame. The blood drained from his face. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost at his own birthday party. He quickly tried to recover, offering a tight, forced laugh and saying something meant to be dismissive, waving his hand as if brushing away a fly. But Mrs. Davies wasn't brushing anything away. She didn't laugh. She kept her gaze fixed on me, her expression a mixture of confusion and something else. Something I couldn't quite decipher. Disapproval, maybe? She then turned her steely gaze back to my father and said something else, her tone no longer polite and social, but sharp and inquisitive. My mother, sensing the shift in atmosphere, glided over to them, her smile plastered on. She tried to link her arm through Mrs. Davies's to steer her attention back to the pristine main table, but the woman stood her ground, unshakable. I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes on me now, not just from my family's table, but from the surrounding ones as well. The quiet drama was becoming a spectacle. My humiliation, which had been a private, internal agony, was now public. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I wanted to be anywhere else on earth. I watched my mother lean in, her voice a frantic, saccharine whisper. She was trying to explain me away. I was sure of it. The babysitter, perhaps. The poor, distant cousin they took in out of charity. Whatever lie she was spinning, it wasn't working. Mrs. Davies shook her head, her eyes narrowing. She took another, more deliberate step away from my parents and started walking towards me. Every head at the main table swiveled to follow her path. Mark looked utterly bewildered, Jessica faintly annoyed. My father looked like he was about to have a coronary. My mother's face was a mask of pure panic. It was happening. The scene she had so desperately tried to avoid was unfolding in the worst way imaginable, initiated not by me, but by their guest of honor. With each step Mrs. Davies took, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. What was happening? Why was she coming over here? Did she know me? Was she going to lecture me for my posture? Complain that the help was too close to the patrons? My mind raced through 100 improbable scenarios. She stopped right in front of my little table. She was even more imposing up close, with intelligent, piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. The cheap paper napkins and sticky chair suddenly felt 10 times more pathetic under her scrutinizing gaze. Chloe and Sam had finally looked up from their screens, sensing the monumental shift in the restaurant's energy. Even Leo had put his phone down. "You're Alexandra Henderson," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Her voice was calm and clear, cutting through the restaurant's murmur. I could only nod, my throat too tight to form words. She smiled then, a genuine, warm smile that completely transformed her severe features. "I thought it was you. My goodness, it's been years. I'm Eleanor Davies." The name clicked. Eleanor Davies. E. Davies. The name on the invoices. The name in the email signatures. The head of marketing for a major boutique hotel chain whose entire rebranding campaign I had been working on for the last 6 months. My biggest client. The project I had told my mother was the reason I couldn't make it tonight. "Mrs. Davies," I managed to choke out, my voice a strangled squeak. I started to stand up, my legs feeling like jelly. "Please call me Eleanor," she said, waving me back into my seat. Her eyes flickered over the table setting, the juice jug, the paper napkins, the proximity to the kitchen, and then back to my face. The warmth in her eyes was replaced by a cold, hard understanding. She got it. She understood the entire situation in an instant. She turned her head slightly, her voice rising in volume, ensuring that not only my parents but half the restaurant could hear her clearly. "Robert," she called out to my father, who was still frozen by the main table. "I had no idea your daughter was the Alex Henderson we've been working with. She is, without a doubt, the most talented graphic designer my company has ever hired. The concepts she's developed for our new global campaign are absolutely revolutionary." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. My father's face was a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, confusion, dawning horror. My mother looked as if she'd been slapped. Mark and Jessica were just staring, their mouths slightly agape. Eleanor wasn't finished. She gestured towards me, sitting amongst the children and the cheap cutlery. "Her work is going to be the centerpiece of our launch next month in Paris. In fact, my husband and I were just saying on the way over how we absolutely must have her at the head table with us at the launch event." She turned back to me, her smile returning, but this time it had a sharp, protective edge to it. "So, Alexandra," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "what on earth are you doing sitting over here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp as a guillotine. Every eye in that section of the restaurant was now locked on my family, waiting for an answer. My mother's face, which had been pale with panic, was now flushing a deep, mottled red. She looked from the powerful, impeccably dressed Eleanor Davies to me in my corner of exile, and for a split second I saw a flicker of genuine, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. It was the look of a chess master whose prize-winning gambit had just spectacularly backfired. My father, meanwhile, finally unfroze. He stumbled forward, a grotesque, sycophantic smile stretching his lips. "Eleanor, well, this is a surprise, a wonderful surprise," he boomed, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. "Alex is so modest, you see. Never talks about her work. We had no idea." He was trying to laugh it off, to spin it as a charming family quirk. Eleanor didn't even glance at him. Her gaze remained on me, her eyebrows raised in a silent, insistent question. The power in the room had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. My parents were no longer the hosts of a celebratory dinner. They were defendants in a courtroom, and Eleanor Davies was the judge. I looked at my father's desperate, pleading face, at my mother's silent fury, at Mark's dawning comprehension, and Jessica's cool, calculating appraisal of the situation. They had pushed me into the shadows, deemed me unworthy of a seat at their table, and now the very person they were trying to impress was demanding to know why. The bitter, helpless girl who had taken the long walk to the kids' table was gone. In her place was someone who was suddenly holding all the cards. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "My mother thought I would be more comfortable here," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the profound silence. I let the words hang there, simple and devastatingly true. I didn't need to add any inflection, any accusation. The scene spoke for itself. The elegant main table with its wine and crystal, and my sad little outpost with its juice and paper napkins. Eleanor's expression hardened. The last shred of social politeness vanished, replaced by a glacial contempt that she directed fully at my parents. "More comfortable," she repeated, her voice dripping with ice. "You thought your daughter, a professional whose work is about to define the future of my brand, would be more comfortable sitting at a children's table while you entertain." She didn't raise her voice, but every word was a lash. "Robert, I have to be honest. This is deeply unsettling." Mr. Davies had now joined his wife, his face a thundercloud. He was a man who understood power, and he was watching a masterclass in its application. He looked at my father not as a new partner, but as a fool who had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. "We came here to celebrate your partnership, Robert," Mr. Davies said, his voice a low rumble. "But my wife and I do business with people we respect, people who value talent and integrity. This is a poor reflection on that." My father looked like he was going to be physically sick. His big night, the culmination of his career, was crumbling into dust around him, all because he couldn't afford his own daughter a seat at his table. My mother, finally realizing that denial and deflection were useless, switched tactics. She rushed forward, her face a mask of practiced regret. "Oh, Eleanor, you must think we are just dreadful," she cried, reaching for Eleanor's arm. Eleanor pulled back slightly, avoiding the touch. "It was all a silly misunderstanding. With you and your husband coming, and the tables, the restaurant made a mistake. Alex was just being a good sport about it." The lie was so blatant, so pathetic, it was almost laughable. But Eleanor was not laughing. "Please don't," she said, cutting my mother off with a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand. "Don't insult my intelligence on top of insulting your daughter." She then turned her back on them completely, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and focused once more on me. "Alexandra," she said, her tone softening again, "there is a table for two that has just opened up by the window. My husband and I were planning to discuss the Paris launch details with you next week, but since you're here, why don't you join us now? I'm afraid we've lost our appetite for this particular celebration." It was an offer, but it felt like a command. It was a lifeline, an escape rope thrown down into the pit I'd been cast into. I looked at my family. My father washen-faced, my mother looked murderous, and Mark was just staring at me with a new, unwelcome expression of respect. He was seeing me for the first time, not as his quirky little sister, but as a person of consequence, a person who had just single-handedly torpedoed his father's big night without raising her voice. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. But mostly I just felt a profound, aching sadness for what my family had become, or perhaps what it had always been. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. My hands were perfectly steady. "I would be delighted, Eleanor," I said, my voice clear and strong. I walked away from the kids' table, away from the sticky chairs and the orange juice, and I didn't look back. I followed Eleanor and her husband to a beautiful, secluded table on the other side of the restaurant. As I sat down, I could feel the weight of my family's stares on my back, burning holes through my dress. The waiter rushed over, unfolding a crisp linen napkin onto my lap and pouring me a glass of the expensive red wine I had watched them drink earlier. Eleanor raised her glass. "To new beginnings, Alexandra," she said with a knowing smile, "and to leaving the children's table behind for good." As I clinked my glass against hers, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The meal was a blur of exquisite food, and even more exquisite conversation. We didn't talk about my family again. We talked about art, about design, about the future of her brand, and my role in it. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I felt respected. I felt adult. After dinner, as we were preparing to leave, Eleanor placed a gentle hand on my arm. "You have my personal number, Alexandra. If you ever need anything, a reference, a recommendation, a sounding board, you call me." It was a powerful gesture, an alignment. She wasn't just my client anymore. She was my ally. Walking out of the restaurant was surreal. My family was gone. Their table was cleared, the ghost of their failed celebration lingering in the air. I stepped out into the cool night, the city lights glittering below, feeling lighter than I had in years. I was halfway to my car when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. My heart stuttered for a moment before I opened it. The message was short, brutal, and unsigned, but I knew exactly who it was from. It was my mother. "You have humiliated this family for the last time," it read. "Dad is calling a family meeting at the house tomorrow at noon. You will be there, and you will apologize to the Davieses and to your father for the damage you have caused. We are not done with this." And then a second text came through, a single chilling sentence that made the blood freeze in my veins. "And we've already spoken to your landlord." The words on the screen blurred. "We've already spoken to your landlord." The implication was immediate and terrifying. My apartment, the one sanctuary I had built for myself, was in a building my father co-owned with a business partner as a side investment. It was a fact I rarely thought about. He had offered me a friends and family rate when I first moved out, a gesture I'd naively interpreted as a rare moment of parental support. Now, I saw it for what it was, a leash, a gilded cage they could rattle whenever they pleased. The cool night air suddenly felt suffocating. They weren't just angry, they were retaliating. They were threatening to make me homeless because I had refused to be humiliated in silence. The calm I had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing. Apologize? Apologize for what? For having a successful career they knew nothing about? For being respected by the very people they were desperate to impress? The absurdity of it was staggering. They had orchestrated my public debasement, and now they were demanding I apologize for the consequences. The family meeting wasn't going to be a discussion. It was going to be an execution. I was expected to walk into my childhood home, bow my head, and beg for forgiveness for the crime of embarrassing them. And if I didn't, the unspoken threat of eviction hung over my head. For the first time, I understood the true depth of their narcissism. Their image wasn't just important to them, it was everything, and they would burn down my entire life to protect it. I spent the night pacing my small apartment, the space that had once felt like my own, now feeling like borrowed time. I looked at the art on my walls, the portfolio of my work on my desk, the life I had painstakingly built for myself, piece by piece, outside of their shadow, and they thought they could just snuff it out. A new feeling began to crystallize amidst the fear and the anger, a hard, defiant resolve. I wasn't the same person who had meekly walked to the kids' table last night. Eleanor Davies hadn't just offered me a new table at a restaurant. She had shown me my own value. She had validated my work, my talent, my entire existence in a way my own family never had. I wasn't going to that meeting to apologize. I was going to war. The next morning, I didn't dress to be presentable. I dressed for battle. A sharp professional blazer, dark trousers, my hair pulled back severely. I looked like I was going to a corporate negotiation, which in a way, I was. I gathered my documents, a copy of my contract with Eleanor's company, a printout of the projected earnings from the campaign, and, on a gut feeling, a copy of my lease agreement. I was done being the artsy, difficult daughter. They were about to meet Alexandra Henderson, successful professional. I walked up the manicured stone path to my parents' house, the place that had always felt more like a museum than a home. The front door opened before I could even ring the bell. My mother stood there, her face a thunderous mask. "You're late," she snapped, turning and walking away without another word. I followed her into the formal living room. It was exactly as I had pictured. My father was seated in his large leather armchair, looking grim and exhausted. Mark and Jessica were on the sofa, a united front of judgment. The jury was assembled. "Alexandra," my father began, his voice low and heavy with disappointment. "What you did last night, the disrespect, the sheer lack of gratitude. You embarrassed me in front of a man who is crucial to my career." "I embarrassed you?" I cut him off, my voice sharp and clear, devoid of the tremor I had expected. "You sat me at a table with children because you were ashamed of my career. A career, it turns out, your crucial business partner happens to value quite highly. The only person who was embarrassed last night was me. And the only people who should be embarrassed today are you." A stunned silence fell over the room. They weren't used to me fighting back. They were used to me sighing and capitulating. "That is not the point," my mother hissed from the sidelines. "The point is, you created a scene. You deliberately undermined your father." "No," I said, turning to face her. "Eleanor Davies created the scene. I just told her the truth when she asked me a direct question. Were you hoping I would lie to her? Is that the kind of integrity you and Dad value so highly?" Mark finally spoke up, his voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone he used with difficult patience. "Alex, come on, this isn't helping. You know how important this was for Dad. You could have just played along for one night. It was a mistake, a seating mix-up." "A mix-up?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Don't insult my intelligence, Mark. You saw the whole thing. You saw Mom lead me to that table. You saw me plead for help, and you shook your head. You told me to just take it. You were all complicit." "Enough," my father roared, slamming his hand down on the arm of his chair. "We are not here to debate the seating arrangements of a dinner party. We are here to discuss your apology to the Davises and the blatant disrespect you have shown this family." He was losing control, his corporate veneer cracking under the pressure. "And we are here to discuss your living situation," my mother added, her voice laced with venom. "Your father has been very generous letting you live in his property for so little, but that generosity is contingent on a certain level of respect, which you have failed to provide." There it was, the threat made explicit. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He was ashamed, but he was going along with it. This was their pincer move. Apologize and fall in line or lose everything. I took a deep breath and placed my folder on the coffee table. "There will be no apology," I stated calmly, "because I did nothing wrong. And as for my living situation," I slid the lease agreement across the table towards my father. "I suggest you read the contract you signed, specifically paragraph 11b. My father picked it up, a confused frown on his face. My mother, Mark, and Jessica craned their necks to see. As he read, the color drained from his face for the second time in less than 24 hours. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What is this?" my mother demanded, snatching the paper from his hands. She read the highlighted clause aloud, her voice trembling with rage. "In the event of a successful rebranding campaign delivery for the Davies Hotel Group, the tenant, Alexandra Henderson, will be granted the option to purchase the property at 80% of the current market value, with the first year of rent payments serving as the down payment." She dropped the paper as if it had burned her. "This clause," she whispered, "was contingent on my work for Eleanor's company, the very work you were so ashamed of last night, the work you tried to hide in a corner." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, mimicking my mother's from the night before. "You see, Dad and I added that clause last year, as a little incentive. He just never thought I'd actually be successful enough to trigger it. But I was. And Eleanor is signing off on the final delivery next week." A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face as I looked at their horrified expressions. "So thank you for everything. Because by trying to hide me, you introduced me to the one person who could help me take this apartment from you forever. And I'm going to enjoy living in my new home. As for the rest of you, I think you'll find my forwarding address is none of your damn business." The silence that followed my declaration was a living thing. It filled the cavernous living room, thick with shock and fury. My mother stared at the lease agreement on the coffee table as if it were a venomous snake. Jessica's perfectly composed face had finally cracked, revealing a flicker of raw astonishment. Mark just shook his head slowly, a dawning, almost grudging respect in his eyes. But it was my father's reaction that was the most telling. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated. He slumped back in his leather armchair, the fight completely gone out of him, looking every one of his 60 years. He remembered signing that addendum, probably seeing it as a harmless, patronizing gesture, a way to placate his artsy daughter with a fantasy clause she'd never be able to enact. He had underestimated me. They all had. You planned this," my mother finally stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You used that." I picked up my folder from the table, the lease agreement feeling like a sacred text in my hands. "You can't just leave," my father said, his voice raspy. It wasn't a command anymore. It was a plea. "Alex, we need to talk about this." "No, we don't," I said, my voice cold. "For my entire life you've done the talking and I've done the listening. You've told me what to be, what to think, where to sit. From now on I'll be making my own decisions, and my first decision is that I'm done with this family." The words hung in the air, tasting of freedom and grief. I saw a flash of real pain in my father's eyes. Maybe a part of him did love me, buried deep beneath the layers of ambition and pride. But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. I turned and walked towards the foyer, the sound of my heels on the marble floor echoing like gunshots. I didn't expect anyone to follow me, but as I reached the front door, a hand touched my arm. It was Mark. "Alex, wait," he said, his voice low. I turned, my defenses still up. "What do you want, Mark? Come to tell me I'm being difficult again." He winced. "No, I wanted to say I'm sorry." The words were quiet, and they sounded genuine. "I saw what Mom was doing last night, and I didn't step in. I always take the path of least resistance with them. It's easier." "Easier for you, maybe," I retorted, the bitterness still sharp on my tongue. "Look," he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "What you did in there, that took guts. And you're right. We underestimated you. I underestimated you. I'm proud of you. It was the first time in my life my brother had ever said he was proud of me. For a moment it almost broke through my armor. Almost. "It's a little late for that, don't you think?" I said, pulling the door open. I left him standing in the foyer and walked out into the bright sunlight, not looking back. The following week was a whirlwind. I called Eleanor, who was not at all surprised by the story, and, in fact, seemed delighted. "Good for you, Alexandra," she'd said. "Never let anyone make you feel small." She fast-tracked the final sign-off on the project, and her legal team reviewed the clause in my lease, confirming its ironclad validity. My father's lawyer tried to put up a fight, of course. My mother, no doubt, had forced his hand. They claimed the clause was made under informal pretenses, that it was non-binding, but it was a legally sound addendum to a signed contract, and they knew it. After a few threatening letters from Eleanor's corporate attorneys, they folded. The apartment was mine. The process of buying the property was impersonal, handled entirely through lawyers and escrow agents. I never spoke to my parents again. Mark texted me once, a simple, "Hope you're okay," which I didn't answer. The silence from them was a relief, a balm on a wound that had been open for 26 years. I finally felt like I could breathe. I spent the next month making the apartment truly my own, painting the walls, buying new furniture, exorcising the ghosts of their ownership. It was my home now, bought and paid for with my own success. My career flourished. The Davies campaign was a massive international hit, and my name was suddenly attached to it. Job offers and new clients poured in. I was finally being seen for who I was, not for who my family wanted me to be. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, about 6 months after the dinner at Le Ciel, I was sorting through my mail when I saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope with my brother's elegant handwriting on the front. No return address. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let them back into my life, not even for a moment. But curiosity, that old nagging serpent, got the better of me. I tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter. It was an invitation. A heavy, embossed cardstock announcing the wedding of my younger cousin, Sarah. It was a big family affair, the kind I had always dreaded. I was about to toss it in the recycling when something fell out from between the folds of the card. It was a small, handwritten note on a piece of torn notebook paper. It was from Leo, the sullen teenage cousin from the kids' table. His handwriting was a barely legible scrawl. "You should come," it read. "It's at Le Ciel. And you won't believe who's sitting at the kids' table this time." The note was a hook, expertly baited. "You won't believe who's sitting at the kids' table this time." My mind immediately started racing. Who could it be? Had my parents been demoted in some spectacular family coup? Had Mark and Jessica had a falling out? The message was clearly designed to pique my curiosity, to lure me back into the lion's den. I crumpled the note in my fist, my resolve warring with a morbid desire to know. Going to that wedding would mean seeing them. My mother with her eyes full of venom. My father with his hollowed-out disappointment. It meant reopening a wound I had worked so hard to close. But Leo's message hinted at a shift in the family dynamics, a cosmic rebalancing of the scales. The storyteller in me, the part that designs narratives for a living, was desperate to see the final act. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. But I wouldn't go as the old Alex. I wouldn't go to seek approval or to make peace. I was going as an observer, a spectator at the circus. This time I had nothing to lose. My apartment was mine. My career was thriving. I was completely independent of them, and that knowledge was a suit of armor. I RSVP'd with a simple yes. I didn't call or text anyone. I just sent back the card, a silent proclamation of my attendance. The day of the wedding, I chose my outfit with meticulous care. It wasn't the understated black dress from last time. I wore a bold, emerald green silk suit, tailored to perfection. It was a power suit. It was the color of money and envy. It was a statement. I wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. Walking back into Le Ciel was a surreal experience. The restaurant was even more opulent, festooned with white roses and shimmering lights for the wedding reception. The hushed reverence was replaced by the cheerful buzz of celebration. But for me, the ghosts of that last dinner lingered in the corners. I saw them before they saw me. They were standing near the grand entrance, part of the receiving line. My father looked older, grayer. My mother was a pillar of social grace, her smile as brittle and bright as spun sugar. Mark and Jessica stood beside them, the perfect couple, as always. For a moment my heart hammered against my ribs, the old fear threatening to resurface. Then I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked forward. My aunt, the mother of the bride, saw me first. Her eyes widened, and she gave me a warm, if slightly surprised, hug. Then it was my turn to face them. My father's face was a complicated mask of shock and something that looked almost like hope. "Alex," he breathed, as if he couldn't believe I was really there. My mother's smile froze on her face. Her eyes did the familiar critical scan of my outfit, but this time I saw no flicker of approval or relief. I saw only cold, hard resentment. She saw the suit, the confidence, the success, and she hated it. "Alexandra," she said, her voice a thin, sharp icicle. "What a surprise." We didn't hug. We didn't even shake hands. The chasm between us was too wide to cross. Mark just nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement, while Jessica gave me a tight, meaningless smile. The exchange was over in 30 seconds, an Arctic pocket in the warm atmosphere of the reception. I moved on, letting the current of the party pull me away from them. I found Leo lurking near the bar, looking deeply uncomfortable in a suit. He saw me and a wide grin split his face. "You came," he said, his voice cracking with teenage awkwardness. "I can't believe you actually came." "Your note was intriguing," I said, smiling back. "So who's the guest of honor at the kids' table tonight? Don't leave me in suspense." Leo's grin turned conspiratorial. He jerked his head towards a familiar shadowed corner of the restaurant, near the potted fern and the swinging kitchen doors. "See for yourself," he said. I followed his gaze, and my breath caught in my throat. There, at the same small wobbly table where I had been exiled, sat a single, solitary figure. It was my brother, Mark. He wasn't on an iPad or a phone. He was just sitting there, staring into a glass of water, his shoulders slumped in his expensive tuxedo. His wife, Jessica, was nowhere in sight. He looked utterly alone, a king deposed from his throne. The sight was so shocking, so completely outside the realm of possibility in my family's rigid hierarchy that I couldn't process it at first. Mark, the golden child. Mark, the brilliant surgeon. Mark, the heir apparent to the Henderson dynasty, sitting at the kids' table. I turned back to Leo, my eyes wide with 1,000 questions. "What happened?" I whispered. Leo took a big gulp of his soda. "It's been a crazy 6 months," he said, lowering his voice. "Jessica left him." I stared at him, dumbfounded. Left him? But they were perfect. Leo snorted. "Yeah, perfect on the outside. Turns out Dr. Perfect had a little problem with his prescription pad. And a nurse. Jessica found out and she didn't just leave him. She scorched the earth. She took him for everything in the divorce, told everyone in the family what he did. Mom and Dad are mortified. Their perfect son is a mess, and it's all public." He took another sip of his soda, clearly relishing the drama. "So tonight they did this. They said he's an embarrassment, that he needs to reflect on what he's done to the family's name. They put him over there so he wouldn't have to talk to anyone." I looked back over at my brother, sitting alone in the dark. The poetic justice was almost Shakespearean. He had watched them do it to me and said nothing, and now the cruel, arbitrary judgment of our parents had turned on him. I felt a dizzying mix of emotions. There was a cold, satisfying flicker of vindication, the part of me that had been wounded wanting to see him get his comeuppance. But there was also a surprising, unwelcome pang of pity. He was still my brother. We had grown up together, shared secrets, built forts out of blankets. Underneath the golden child facade there was a person, and right now that person was completely broken. "Wow," I finally managed to say. "That's a lot." "Yeah," Leo said. "The mighty have fallen, huh?" He looked from me, in my sharp power suit, to Mark in his corner of shame. Funny how things work out. I spent the rest of the reception on autopilot, making small talk, congratulating the bride and groom. But my eyes kept drifting back to that corner table. No one went near him. He was an island of misery in a sea of celebration. Our parents, my father in particular, pointedly ignored his existence, laughing and glad-handing guests as if their son wasn't sitting in a timeout 20 feet away. Late in the evening, as the dancing started, I saw Jessica. She had come to the wedding after all, but she'd come alone. She was holding court with a group of friends, laughing brightly, looking radiant and liberated. She was thriving. I watched her for a moment, and then I made a decision. I walked away from the dance floor, away from the light and the music, and started the long, familiar walk towards the kids' table. This time, however, I wasn't being sent. I was going by choice. Mark looked up as my shadow fell over him, his eyes bloodshot and dull. He looked surprised to see me, and then a wave of shame washed over his face. He looked down at his hands. "Come to gloat?" he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "Come to say I told you so." I looked at my brother, the fallen prince, and then I looked towards our parents, dancing and smiling, having successfully hidden their latest family embarrassment in the shadows. And I knew what I had to do. No, I said, pulling out the empty, sticky chair across from him and sitting down. I'm not here to gloat. He looked up, confused. Then why are you here? He asked. I picked up the jug of orange juice from the center of the table and poured a glass for myself. Because, I said, my voice steady, nobody should have to sit here alone. As I said it, a commotion started near the entrance of the restaurant. Several waiters were rushing towards the front, their faces etched with panic. My cousin Leo ran over to our table, his eyes wide. You guys, he panted, you need to see this. Some guy is out there. He's trying to serve Dad with some kind of legal papers, right in the middle of everything. My head snapped towards the entrance. Through the throng of curious wedding guests I could see my father, his face purple with rage, arguing heatedly with a tall, determined-looking man in a rumpled suit. The man was holding out a sheaf of papers. My mother was trying to physically block the man, her socialite smile replaced with a venomous snarl, hissing something about security. This wasn't just a scene, it was a 5-alarm fire at the peak of their social calendar. My brother Mark, who had been slumped in his chair, suddenly sat bolt upright. The misery in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of alarm. What's going on? He asked, his voice raw. But I already had a sickeningly good idea. I thought back to Eleanor Davies, to her quiet power and her corporate attorneys. I remembered her final words to me. If you ever need anything. My parents had tried to fight the apartment sale, however briefly. They had forced a legal confrontation. And powerful people like Eleanor don't take kindly to having their agreements challenged. This felt like the other shoe dropping. This was the fallout. Stay here, I said to Mark. And before he could protest, I was on my feet, moving through the crowd. The guests parted, whispering and staring, sensing that I, the other exiled Henderson child, was somehow connected to this new drama. As I got closer, I could hear the process server's calm, unwavering voice cutting through my father's blustering threats. Robert Henderson, the man said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. You are being served with a lawsuit for breach of contract and malicious interference, filed on behalf of the Davies Hotel Group. My father froze, the color draining from his face. Malicious interference. That was a serious, reputation-destroying accusation in his world. It meant my parents hadn't just tried to block the sale of my apartment. They had likely tried to damage my professional relationship with Eleanor, probably through slander or by pressuring my father's business connections. They had tried to ruin me, and Eleanor was bringing the full force of her corporate empire down on them in retaliation. The man finally thrust the papers into my father's chest. You've been served, he announced before turning and calmly walking out of the restaurant, leaving a crater of silent shock in his wake. My father stood there, holding the papers as if they were radioactive. My mother looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. In her mind, this was all my fault. I was the poison that had infected their perfect lives. You, she seethed, her voice a low, trembling whisper. You did this. Before I could respond, a new voice cut in, sharp and clear. Actually, I believe you did this to yourselves. Jessica. She had materialized at my side, her expression cool and unreadable. She looked at my mother, then at my father, with an expression of utter contempt. You two are so obsessed with your precious image that you destroy everything you touch. You did it to Alex. You did it to Mark. And now you've finally done it to yourselves. She turned to me. I never liked you, Alex, she said with brutal honesty. But I respect you. You got out. I just wish I'd been smart enough to do it sooner, before my name was tied to this train wreck. With a final withering look at my parents, she turned on her heel and walked away, a queen abdicating a corrupt and crumbling throne. The party was over. The music had died down, and guests were starting to make quiet, awkward excuses to leave, not wanting to be associated with the implosion of the Henderson family. My father, looking utterly broken, stumbled away towards the bar. My mother stood alone, a statue of rage and humiliation. I felt nothing for her. Not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just a vast, empty space where a daughter's love used to be. I turned and walked back to the kids' table. Mark was still there, watching the entire scene unfold. He looked up at me, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. Did you know that was going to happen? He asked. I had a feeling, I admitted. Eleanor Davies doesn't play games. He was silent for a long time, just staring at the remains of the party, at the wreckage of our family. Jessica was right, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. They destroy everything. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, maybe for the first time since we were children. They made me into what they wanted, the perfect son, the brilliant surgeon. And I let them. I became so focused on being their golden child that I forgot how to be a good person, a good husband, a good brother. He finally met my eyes, and his were swimming with tears. I'm so sorry, Alex, for everything, for that night, for letting you sit here alone. The apology was raw, stripped of all artifice. It was the apology of a man who had lost everything and finally understood why. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. I know, I said softly, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of the bond we once shared. The damage was deep, catastrophic even, but in that shared moment of exile, a tiny seed of something new was planted. We sat there for a while longer, two castaways at a sticky table, as the last of the guests trickled out. Eventually my father came back from the bar, supported by my aunt. He looked right through us, his eyes glassy and vacant. My mother was gone. The next few months were a quiet rebuilding. The lawsuit was devastating for my father. It settled out of court, but the financial hit and the damage to his reputation were immense. He was forced into an early, unceremonious retirement. My mother retreated from her social life, unable to face the whispers and the pity. They had built their entire world on a foundation of image, and when that cracked, the whole structure came crashing down. Mark went to rehab. He started therapy. He began the long, difficult process of figuring out who he was without the pressure of being the perfect son. We started talking, tentatively at first, then more regularly. We didn't try to fix the past, but we started building a new, more honest future. About a year after the wedding, I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment watching the sunset. My phone rang. It was Mark. "Hey," he said, his voice lighter and clearer than I'd heard it in years. "What are you doing for dinner tonight?" "No plans," I said. "Why?" "Well," he said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. "I was thinking. There's a new restaurant that just opened up downtown. I managed to get a table for two." By the window. My own smile spread across my face. It was an offer free of obligation, free of performance, free of family politics. It was just a brother asking his sister to dinner. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that a lot." As I hung up, I looked out over the glittering city. The lights looked like a million tiny celebrations. I had lost a family, but I had found my brother again. And more importantly, in the quiet corner of a fancy restaurant, I had finally, truly found myself. I had a home, a career, and a future that belonged completely to me, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would never have to sit at the kids' table again.